biomass crops. I think the overwhelming feeling from our group is that it would often be the grasses that might be easier to integrate, partly because they're more similar to arable crops, and so the kinds of equipment that you would need to manage them are likely to be similar as opposed to some of the woody crops, which might be more challenging. Some of the, I suppose the overwhelming feeling was that we could use some of these biomass crops as alternative vegetations for existing uses. So one of them might be, for instance, to provide bird shelter for game birds, which I guess is already being done, but as an alternative to some other kind of vegetation you might use. As a source of animal bedding, again, as an alternative for existing plants that you might use, for managing water quality and bank stabilization in riparian zones would be another example. We also had a few more sort of a few other thoughts that were a bit more novel. Yeah. One of these was thinking about how you could incorporate biomass crops into what are effectively regenerative practices or as part of longer-term management. So I think one of the examples that was raised is in potato systems where you might need to leave a long fallow period to sort of remove potential pests and pathogens. You could plant a field that would otherwise, be left fallow for 6 or 8 years with something like Miscanthus or a suitable grassy biomass crop. Because if you're having to leave it fallow in any case, why not get a decent income from it? Another suggestion was to use it as a measure for soil improvement, or let's say you've got somewhat degraded soils and you want to rebuild those soils, improve soil structure and so forth. Why not put in a biomass crop? If you know that as a farmer or a landowner, land user, that you're going to need to set aside that field for some period of time so that you can rebuild the natural soil fertility, why not put in something that might give you a return? We had some discussion around wider benefits in terms of using combinations of plants that might have similar management but different physiologies and different products that could go to different markets as a kind of a means of diversifying what you're doing. So having, say, a number of different grassy biomass crops that you could grow in combinations, perhaps, so that, like, let's say if one doesn't do so well because of the climate conditions, the others might, do better. The other thing we talked about was, and a slightly more, again, sort of novel idea was thinking about how you might fit in bioenergy crops into sort of regional scale energy networks, for instance. So rather than saying supplying like the whole of the UK or something, but supplying your local county with a mix of renewables, and could biomass crops fit in that way? So integrating it into an existing sort of farming landscape. We thought one of the benefits from that might be the fact that farmers at that scale are more likely to be guaranteed a steady income from that, because if they're supplying, let's say in Northumberland, they're supplying energy for that part of the Northeast, then, there's more likely to be consistent demand as opposed to, being exposed to like in an international or national marketplace. One of the points that was raised was slightly separate, is that, this touches a bit on challenges and opportunities, but the scale of the challenge, I suppose, might depend on how radical what you're doing was compared to existing practice. So if you're just looking at a single field, that might be in a short rotation system or a marginal land, that's less of a mindset change. Whereas if you're going to an agroforestry system like silver arable, which is quite alien in the UK context, as opposed to agroforestry systems like hedgerows or shelter belts, that might require bigger perception and skills change, because it's much more it's so different from existing practice. So I guess that was just a point around the level of integration might depend on how close it was to current practice. The closer it is to what people are familiar with and what what they know and what equipment they might already have, the easier it might be, as opposed to something that's a bit further afield and might require different skills, different equipment, and completely different sort of planning setup.